Oki Naganago Mekoche Chestakoma Dakota Nagotine Siku. My name is Michelle Robinson. I use she and they pronouns only to try to decolonize. That's why I use they. I am cis, I am straight. I have a lot of queerlings in my life. So I hope to always be 2S LGBTQ friendly. Obviously, gendered violence is an issue I talk about regularly. I'm here at I'm on Enoch Nation right now at the River Cree Casino and Hotel, but normally I'm in Treaty 7. Normally I'm in Mohkinstsis at the Blackfoot Confederacy's lands. So it's interesting being in Cree territory as a Satu Dene, talking about this wonderful book that Killing the Wittigo, that we are honored to have the author here with us, Indigenous culture-based approaches to waking up, taking action, and doing the work of healing. And boy, oh boy, this has been a really great read for me, because for me, we get a lot of, I recently got diagnosed with ADHD, and one of the books that people kept saying over and over again was actually this like French male doctor. And so I picked it up and I started reading it, and it was, very colonial, very much from the lens of a man. And so I've been having a hard time going through it. And as opposed to this one, went through your bio, seen those cute pictures of you when you were little. And I really felt good about this book as I went through it. So I wanted to thank you for writing it. One of my critiques of most books is that they don't come from an Indigenous lens. And some of the books, like we do lots of non-Indigenous books here, and then we just talk about it through an Indigenous lens. So when other Indigenous folks come and join us and they talk about it through their way, what they've seen, what they pulled out of it. We had one not too long ago, and like the woman just outright said that Dene men beat their wives. And I'm like, I take issue with that. And I think that perpetuates the wrong stereotypes, right? Like, so those are things that we just try to dissect as people talk about these books, and then, go from there. So I just wanted to thank you, Suzanne, for coming. And I just reached out to you last minute and you joined us. I can't believe it. So I just say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And a little bit about me. I'm a Yellowknife Dene band member, voting member, but my family is from further north, Satu. And then we were assigned Yellowknife Dene after my granny went to Fort Providence Indian Residential School, the Catholic one there. And then I have an auntie and uncle that went to Bompass Hall up in Yellowknife. And then they all went through St. Patrick's church and school there. So yeah, and it's funny because I know Yellowknife was considered a city, and like to this day I'm like, Yellowknife's not a city, it's a town at best. But
Yeah.
so I was born in Calgary, ironically. So my mom had a small grant to go to SAIT. And so, yeah, and that's how I ended up being here. And my dad and mom got married, and then they was split up. It was not a great marriage, but I do have another brother with the same mom and same dad. And then I have a half brother with a different mom. So just that's a bit about me. So I just wanted to let you know a little more about who I am and where I'm coming from. And obviously reconciliation does take settlers too. So for there, I used to work at a nonprofit, and they wanted to do something that was regular. So I suggested a book club because I'm a reader, and that's how that came to be. And we started that in 2016. So, and then as you know, every year there's like a wonderful slew of books that are coming out, and I'm just recently giving myself permission to enjoy more fiction. So I've been doing that. My podcast that's coming out today is actually going to be with author Alex Soup, because I read his book on Indigenous horror stories, and I loved it so much. So I was able to connect with him, and he was so eager to do a podcast. So happy to do it. So that should be coming out tonight. But this one will probably come out maybe next week. So we'll go from there. Yeah. So welcome. I wanted to ask you so many things, but I guess the biggest one is what made you write this book, and if you want to talk about the book and the process, that would be wonderful.
Oh, well, that's a great starting question. For sure, I would. And thank you for having me, and thank you for all who are attending and all who will view this after the recording is posted. You know, you say you're honored, but I'm honored that you're reading the book. So, we can create a little, mutual admiration society here. I think I wrote the book for many reasons. I mean, the book I had come out in 2019, Legacy, is a bit thicker than this. It's probably about this thick to this one being about that thick. And it's more of a like narrative, like you have to start at page 1 and go to page 3, whatever it is. And and you can read the separate chapters, and people who have read it say they like it. Thank you. But I felt like I needed to talk about those same issues, apart from the parts of my family story that I had used in Legacy. Legacy is not a memoir, it's just a nonfiction book on intergenerational trauma and all about how important stories are. So the stories we tell about ourselves, the stories that the dominant society tells us about ourselves as Indigenous people, or in my case, as mixed Indigenous people, because I have a lot of Scottish and Slavic and Norman ancestry, as well as the Cree and Passamaquoddy from in New Brunswick as well on my Scottish side. So, the legacy was all about stories and how we might get to healing, both within the individual and also as communities, and as families and as a country. So I talked a lot in that book around what the dominant society, colonial society if you prefer, settler society, whatever your name for it is, around how, like, what their work is in terms of talking about healing from colonial trauma. Because just like reconciliation, I don't think that's work I don't think reconciliation work is actually for Indigenous people at all. I think that's just stuff that Canada needs to do, right? But I think in terms of healing, the healing work is not just stuff for Indigenous people either, because colonialism means that we're still experiencing the erasures of our identities. Our kids are still being taught in dominant society institutions what to think of themselves, and it's not always accurate. The healthcare system is known for being, not very helpful to us, and we still have very poor health outcomes as Indigenous peoples. The prison system, the justice system is locking us up and applying dangerous offender labels on us, which is basically allows the justice system to keep Indigenous people locked up for however long they want, because there's no end to a dangerous offender incarceration, right? So all of these systems and institutions are still acting upon us in ways that keep us experiencing trauma, or that at least re-traumatize us from the historical events of colonization, or that trigger us, or that just downright do not help us heal, right? So I'm sorry to give you a long answer to your question, because that was sort of the legacy thing. And I can't sort of talk about why I wrote Killing the Wittigo without talking about legacy to start.
100%. I'm glad you talked about it too. And I don't want you to feel like it's too long of an answer, because
Okay.
I think that's the whole point, right? Is that, we're talking about these issues and people are still not getting it. So,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I wrote Legacy. I got so many wonderful letters from people. And I did have some letters and emails and messages on the socials and all that stuff from younger people. And younger people were saying, my cousin gave me this book. It's a little long, but I'll try, right? And I had a lot of educators contact me and say, I've read this book, can I, and I'm photocopying it, educational use only, that's legal. There's parts of this chapter for my classroom in grade 12 and da 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 da. And so I knew teachers were using it. I knew young people were reading it, but I felt like I needed to sort of take what was in Legacy get rid of all of the examples that I'd used from my life and my family's life, simplify it a bit, but not water it down. To
Yeah.
simplify something doesn't mean to make it less, have less of an impact or anything, but just to take away like the story part of it, right? Well, story is in here, but and to make a different version of it, and to talk more about and to put in some of the stuff that I'd had to leave out of legacy. So that's the first reason that I wanted to, well, I guess there's a couple of reasons there, that I wanted something that would appeal more to younger people, because this one has like visuals and, it has like talk boxes, I call them, like
Yeah.
quotation. And I was able to talk with 3 young people about their experiences and include that in this book. So there's the voices of young people themselves. And that's all stuff that wasn't in legacy. So I felt like, and there's like stuff in here, like trigger warnings and stuff that I wasn't able to put into legacy, because legacy is just a nonfiction book from page 1 to page whatever.
Yeah.
And I felt like I could do more with this, make it in sort of appeal to young readers, get rid of, my family story and some of the media stories and some of the things I include in legacy. And in place of that material, I thought what I do in Wittigo is really talk about some strategies. So when I talk about healing mind, body, spirit, and emotion, and we talk about toxic stress, well, what's a stress busting exercise? What kind of mindfulness exercises are out there for us to do?
Hmm.
Or what is a trigger? Like I explained it in legacy, but here I've given a list, and then I've given some like how-tos on what to happen, or what to do rather, if you think that you've been thrown back into the past, you've been triggered into a past experience where you're feeling unsafe, or you're feeling angry or unheard or disrespected or judged, or all those things that trigger us. So I felt like I needed to take out my story and put in some how-tos, and make it a little, easier to read in terms of like having some art and some bold coloring. And yeah, I just wanted to do like a reimagining. I don't know if you're aware of that book, Stamped from the Beginning. And then they have a remix of it. It's written by a Black scholar down in the States.
Ah,
And then he did a version of that. Well, he worked with another author on it, and it's called Stamped from the Beginning, the Remix. So I kind of called in my own head, Killing the Wittigo is like a remix of Legacy, but there's some new stuff in here. All of the stuff that's in Legacy is also here, but I've written it differently. And yeah, so that was 2 of the main reasons, I think, is to make it, appeal to young people, and also people who are like more reluctant readers. Like they say, I don't think I want to read a paragraph book. And there's lots of folks out there at so many ages that are just not readers. And I'm
yeah.
like, how do I get this information to people who maybe are like not gonna sit with a book that's like an inch thick, inch and a half thick, right?
Right.
And I did want to put more of the helpful how to, like the approaches work in there. So
Mhm.
yeah. So that's
Well,
basic.
it's an awesome book. I thought I maybe it's because that Gaber Mente book was just so for me. I was just like, I am gonna kill myself actually reading this. So, and I say that as a joke. I have a teenage daughter, and she says that all the time. Oh my gosh, I should have never said that. I take that back.
Uh,
um, I
no.
wanted to tell you, I really liked a lot of the information that you had in here and the way you put it out so that folks could flip through it.
Mm,
Actually think this is a really good book to have in a bathroom for
mm,
people to flip through as they go through it because again, I'm a big person about tools in the toolbox when it
mm,
comes to what do I do. And when I was younger, I used to have this book about, childhood development and what to expect at certain ages. And when I was feeling overwhelmed with my child at a certain age, I would just kind of quickly read through that section. And so I really loved the way that was put together. I didn't come across anything here that I was gonna like, um, I don't know, say that this was a, you know, could we have done this? Could we have done that? Like nothing like that. It was just so refreshing to
Yeah.
have something from an Indigenous point of view as opposed to a Black point of view. Because I love Black books because they talk about anti-racism. It's just that some of the authors you can tell still aren't coming from that decolonizing lens.
Yeah.
So I hesitate to, you know, bring that up. And in fact, some of my worst violence that I've received are from settlers that are POC, because they don't, you know, they're just so proud to be Canadian, and they know they're supposed to be settler, colonial, white supremacist cheerleaders. So I actually find it sometimes really difficult. Academics, obviously, very different because they're unpacking that already. But like, I just mean out in the world, day to day. Yeah, right. Some of them. I wanted to read to you because we normally have quite a few folks that would be here. And they read the book, even though they couldn't come. And I loved that regardless of not being able to come, they still had something for me to, you know, read out loud to everybody else. And I didn't tell anyone you were coming.
Ooh,
Yeah,
so
so they were surprised. Like, it's a surprise, right? So but I'm going to just pause it for a second here. Oh, actually, Rosemary, would you like to talk to Suzanne about the book first and tell me a bit about what your thoughts and feelings were, and then I'll get our other guest, and then I'll read these messages.
Hi, Suzanne. Welcome. Um, Michelle knows this, but I have low vision. So unless a book is something I can access the iBooks, either as an audio book or an ebook, or I can select text and listen, I can't read it. But I was just so impressed by the title, because based on what has been talked about in this book club before, and in all of the readings that we do and the work that we do in the Reconciliation Action Group, the issue of healing, trauma, intergenerational trauma, bilateral violence, they're just so critical. So I really regret that at this point I can't read it. And I hope you can talk to your publishers about a different format in the future. But just from listening to you, I'm so impressed by the fact that you didn't just rest on your laurels with legacy, but that you said, okay, I want younger people to be able to access this, and other people, and that you took the route that you did. I'm just so impressed by that. So thank you. And maybe just I mean, you know, I'm a white settler. My grandkids are white, but um, you know, a teenage daughter, high anxiety. They're all loving that movie. What is it, Upside Down or Inside Out or whatever it is? So I think anything that can speak to younger people about what they're going through, especially young Indigenous folk living in the colonial system, is just critical. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks for saying that. And yeah, it's too bad that I wasn't able to do, there's an ebook available of Killing the Wittigo, but yeah, there's no audiobook right now, which is too bad. And there may never be. I mean, you know, my publisher kind of controls all of that. I can ask them if there's any plans.
Or if you
There
talk,
is.
okay, if you could talk to your publisher, but it doesn't have to be an audiobook. For these serious books, I actually prefer ebooks, but I have to be able to buy them through iBooks. If I get them from the library, I can't use text to speech, that application. Yeah, and
Well,
that's because of Apple and how they control everything. So anyway, talk to them
yeah.
about being picked up by
Yeah. And I wonder
iBooks.
if this is something, I don't know if Michelle, I mean, Michelle's obviously bought a copy of the book. If you buy, I'm just reading the back of the book here. It says here, ECW, you can get an ebook for free. So if Michelle wants to contact ebook at ecwpress.com, you can get an ebook. And I don't know if that's something that then would translate over to iBook. No, you're nodding no. Oh, crap.
Sorry. I've been through this.
Well, that's Apple for you then.
Yeah.
Well, Legacy is on audiobook, but yeah, not killing the Wittigo right yet, but I will advocate for that in the future.
Okay.
And thank you. Thank you for your words around, Indigenous youth today, because I was a classroom teacher. Well, I mean, I've worked in adult education since like 92. I graduated from undergraduate school in 1990. So it was like 91, 92 that I started working places like Native Women's Resource Center and St. Christopher House in Toronto, now has a different name. I did some workshops at NamiRes, the Native Men's Residence in Toronto, worked with the literacy crew there on some stuff. And this was like 30 plus years ago. So, that was the way I got my start, was in adult education. And and I've done adult skills training and education stuff. And then at some point in the mid-aughts, I caught myself thinking, if only I had been able to work with this client or these folks, when they were kids. I caught myself thinking that because, I love working with adults, but adults sometimes, and I mean this with no judgment, I mean it only to be what I have seen and observed and what I know about my own self as an adult human being in the world, is that sometimes change is scary, right? And we can be resistant to change. Anybody, that's anybody in the world, never mind someone who's experienced or experiencing trauma, right? And so as I was working with adults and I kept thinking, oh, if I'd only been able to work with this person when they were a child, because if you know any children, they are sponges. And they too can resist change. They too will sometimes act out, fear or just distress that they can't always, they don't always trust adults around them to help them. They don't always, there can be resistance there too. I mean, people, we are what we are. But I feel like when I started teaching children in elementary school, so I'm qualified to teach grades 4 to 10. So I usually worked with kids who are like 9 or 10 years old and then up to high school, early high school, like 15 or so. And I call them the puberty crew. I love my puberty crew, right? When they're just getting their own identities and kind of breaking away from some of the thoughts in their families sometimes, and evaluating who they want to be in the world and how they want to present, and trying to figure out, like, why did this happen? And like all of that, like developmental stuff that of course we do all the time. That's what the medicine wheel tells us, is that we're all going around that wheel. We're all developing all the time, but it's so rapid in children, right? And it's so like, you can look at a child 1 week and then the next week they're like, what happened to you? Because they're so different, right? And they're little sponges and they're growing all the time and their brains are making new synapses. I mean, adult brains do that too. But when I started working with kids in 2007, and I worked in the school system till about 2012. And then I decided that maybe I should start writing books, because I was able to reach, however many kids a year. And toward the end of my teaching career, as short as it was, I was working, like I was doing program work. So I wasn't teaching a classroom. I was working with kids from all the different classrooms in the school, and they would come to my room for cultures and traditions work relating, and then we would relate that to the provincial curriculum, right? And just the changes I saw in those children, the changes between sitting in a classroom at the back and teachers telling me, like, this child never spoke before. This child never completed a test. They would just sit there. And I know that they're smart, but they just wouldn't do it. And like all of these things that were then pathologized by the school system. And so I thought to myself, at the end of that work, and having seen what a classroom that was based on, first, arts education, and then second, me bringing Indigenous culture-based frameworks, and in a school board like Toronto, we had kids from every Indigenous nation. We had Nuu-chah-nulth from out west living in Toronto. We had Inuk, we had Oneida, we had, you know, Anishinaabe, we had Cree, Plains Cree, we had, you know, everybody in a city as diverse as Toronto. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I possibly do that? Like, how can I talk about every culture? But of course I can't. It's what I tried to do there, and that's what I've tried to do in Wittigo, is talk about values, because I think Indigenous values are the same across the board, even if we use different words or different frameworks or different understandings, the values, you know, of respect and responsibility and reciprocity and relationships, all of those things that create sustainability and good governance and balanced health and all of that stuff. I thought, what if I could write books that would then reach, instead of like the 75 or so kids I was reaching in the last program, I thought, what if I could reach thousands and potentially tens of thousands of readers? So I'm happy that you mentioned, you know, the young folk, because I wanted this to be a book for everyone, but for them as well. And that's also why I took out a lot of the stuff about my life, like examples that I'd used in Legacy, because I'm 56 this year, like just turned in June, and kids do not, if a kid's picking up Wittigo, they don't want to hear about my life. Like, talking in the 70s and the 80s about me being in school, they don't care, right? God bless them, right? You know, but they don't care. So I thought, and that's quite right, you know, they want to read about their peers, they want to read about maybe someone that could be a few years older than them, that might sort of, you know, because they're thinking about where they're going to be when they go to high school or when they go to uni or whatever. So that's why I talked to 3 young Indigenous folks for this book, and put their stories in there and their quotations, because but yeah, I it's a book for everyone, but I definitely, because our youth today are facing so much, and that's, I guess, another podcast, but we know the things.
I
But
love it though. I
yeah.
love it. Thank you for that. Rosemary, did you want to say anything else before we let our other friend? Okay, just 1 second. I'll pause it. So I just wanted to read this piece to you to give you some context, Rosemary. It's 222, carrying around toxic anger, toxic shame, and hatred is hard work. It can interfere with our relationships. It can lead us to self-medicate with drugs or alcohol. Thinking too much about what happened or who did it can take time away from the things we want to do in life. Some survivors of intergenerational trauma say that they chose to forgive so that they can stop the pain. Other Indigenous people say forgiveness isn't possible and isn't necessary. And there's this quote that says, the concept of forgiveness, no matter the wrong, is a Christian one. The repainting of powerful people who fought and died for our land as gentle, passive people striving always to be the bigger person is as false as the Pope wearing a headdress. We can have dignity without honoring our oppressors. We can have anger without letting that anger consume us. We do not have to forgive. And that was said by Anishinaabe Tara Hauska. And then it says, does forgiveness break the cycle of intergenerational trauma? Is forgiveness possible when wrongs are not made right? Does forgiveness build understandings? Why are victims always given the task of doing the forgiving? How is the power part of forgiveness and understanding? And I really love that. Then she goes into the 12 principles of Indigenous philosophy, and it has more resources at the back that I give in my podcast even. So I really loved all of that. That's towards the end. But I wanted to read that to you to give context to one of the messages that I got here. So I got 3 messages from some of our regulars that would normally come, and I'll read Kat's first. Unfortunately, she just had a passing in the family, so we're thinking about her and her mother-in-law who passed, and her family. And she says sorry for not coming, as if that's, like never worry about that. But she says, here's some brief thoughts on the book. Feel free to read it to the group if you'd like. I thought it was a really great book. And I like that they offered that this book is a great resource, not just for the youth, but anyone. I liked that they offered solutions at the end of each chapter and that the topics were talked about in plain language. However, to me, the information, I'm trying to focus on the good ideas they had, some of which helped me to be a better understanding of myself. I'm eager to hear what you, Michelle, and the group think of this. And so that's what Kat had to say. Marla said, just wanted to let you know a few things that stuck out. The comment from Montana on feeling that there's a right way to smudge and to do things. This is a colonial mindset at its finest. The expectation of always doing things right, being a perfectionist, worrying about making mistakes when the opposite of how Indigenous community teaches people, come alongside me and learn by doing. It's interesting when I have been asked in sessions with non-Indigenous people, asking Indigenous elders and other community members questions about smudge, and it's all from a base of fear of doing the wrong thing. And I relate to that because I've just seen how Christianity has like infiltrated a settler mind like that, and ours too. The comment from Tara Husa about the forgiveness concept, no matter the wrong, is that Christian one, and that repainting Indigenous people who fought and died for their land as gentle, passive people striving to always be the bigger person is as false as the Pope wearing a headdress. We don't have to forgive. I love this statement. So powerful and changes the dialogue. I think when you look at it from this perspective, what is the value of forgiveness? It shouldn't be the be all and end all, and it reinforces why settlers get so angry and defensive when forgiveness isn't forthcoming. Why on earth should you ever expect to be forgiven? I love the 12 principles of Indigenous philosophy. This reinforces what I have been learning from elders around the principles of kindness to everything, thinking about your actions, the next 7 generations, the importance of a whole person, the importance of considering your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual being, and teaching and sharing your knowledge with others, but also taking responsibilities for your learnings, behaviors, and actions to yourself and others. I'm hanging this on my wall at work for others to see. So she really liked that. Wendy says, I'm working through Clearing the Plains as you recommended. It is very slow, very academic, as you said, but very much valuable. But she was unable to get to this book quite yet because she has no internet and has been away all summer. So, and that's okay because it is August, and I'm always shocked when people are willing to come in the middle of summer. And but I know too, like a bookworm is a bookworm is a bookworm. You can't stop us from reading. So that if people can come, great. If they can't, they can't. So lower vote book clubber turnout today, but I mean, I know that this book was really impactful. For me, especially, I've been going through a lot of triggers beyond choosing this book. I've been going through so much lately. So it was just for me, I was meant to read it now. I was meant to read it to reinforce a few things. I was telling my massage, I had gotten a car accident a few years ago, and I've been dealing with a lot of chronic neck pain. So I have to go regularly for massage, cupping, all that stuff. And what's coming out that I didn't know is that, ironically, it's been this long. My chiropractor's been wondering if I actually have post-traumatic stress disorder from a stupid car accident, and now it's manifesting. And I'm like, well, now I got to go see a therapist to like either confirm or see if that's from all the other crapola that is in this book. So, just trying to sort it all out because I've never had to deal with anxiety attacks like I've been dealing with lately. So for me, this book was exactly what I needed to read right now. Once upon a time, I used to, and I was telling my team there, I used to listen to Dr. Phil and Oprah religiously. And Dr. Phil would always say, whenever you have negative self-talk, challenge it. So I used to do that for a long, long time as part of my coping strategies, along with counseling, all the things that I would do. But like once the pandemic hit, it was like a full-time job and I just couldn't quit. And I was just like, why are all these thoughts coming through my head? And and this was post the accident as well. So now that I'm starting to realize like there's a huge correlation there as well.
Yeah.
I have to start focusing on what that looks like too. Anyway, so this kind of has helped me with more of those tools. I'm Satu Dene. Our area, we come from the 9 Dene laws, and that's more what I'm supposed to follow. But I have a deep respect for the Anishinaabe 7 sacred teachings. I have a deep respect for folks who use that as part of their learning. The medicine wheel, again, somebody else's teachings, but I respect it and see where it comes from as you wrote about it. So I just wanted to say thank you for writing this book, and I'm going to recommend it to youth as well. I think it's really important to read, like you said, the voices of their own and in a way that they understand, because like my daughter does speak a different language than I at times. And you know, and you see it on TikTok as well, trying to, you know, learn their slang and learn what's cool to them. So I think that books like this matter. And I think it's really important as Indigenous youth are trying to reclaim who they are, you know, be given these tools. The late elder that I used to have locally in our area, Patrick Deranger, he used to say to me, you know, during AIM, they just didn't have the words to explain colonialism. And even for me, you know, it's been taking a long time. I experienced racism at the hospital when I was giving birth in my 30, when I was 30. And so I've been unpacking racism and colonialism. Before that, it was just gendered violence. And some of it fit for me, but as a native, like some of it didn't. And so there was still a little loose ends there. And then when I started to really unpack colonialism and racism, it's like, why aren't we talking about this more? Mending Broken Hearts, the Wellbriety. I became a facilitator for that. And, you know, the big takeaway is colonial violence causes colonial trauma. And it's important to have people that believe you. And I've never experienced like white settlers that will like who are so-called professionals get it. And even my own doctor, you know, now is a, you know, hijab wearing Black woman, but she doesn't understand the colonialism here. So it is really hard for me to find health professionals. And I stumbled across the Alberta Virtual Indigenous Care Clinic, and that has been a wonderful resource for me. That's actually what helped me get my ADHD diagnosis as well. So I'm trying to unpack what that means and realizing, trying to what am I masking and what's legitimately makes me happy. That's been an interesting journey the last month. So yeah. So
Your first question for me was, why did you write Killing the Wittigo? And I had two kind of main reasons. And now with what you just said, I love having conversations like this. With what you just said has now made me think, oh, I also need to add this, because you're making me think about things that I wasn't thinking about an hour ago, right? So I think what you were just saying is exactly why, another reason why I wrote this book is because I'm still figuring out my own healing journey, right? We all are. So I'm happy for you that you're getting better care now from the service that you mentioned. I'm in BC, I'm not in Alberta, so I don't know the names of the things you have there, but you know, we have First Nations Health Authority here, but they recently went to like only status Indians can access services. So, oh, all the folks like me who, you know, are non-status or mixed or whatever the situation is, or estranged or somehow disconnected, that's going to be an issue. But it's good to know that those things are out there for folks like you. And I think partly why I write these books is because when I'm on my journey, I'm like, well, maybe I can help myself figure this out if I write a book about it. Right. And then in doing the writing, maybe that will make sense. And in going farther on my healing journey, you know, maybe that will make sense to other people, right? It's hard out there. And you're right, we're not getting the care. Indigenous peoples are not getting the care. And, you know, and I should say, like, I only write from the point of view of Cree culture because, you know, I grew up in Sagatawa, Peace River, right? I'm from the Peace and I'm still putting together the history and learning all of that stuff about, you know, where my mother's from and all of that stuff. But all I can do is just offer the world the things that people have been sharing with me and that I've been learning.
Mm-hmm.
If I can put them in a book and share that wider. And, you know, I had a moment when I was writing Legacy, so it was in the middle tens, where I had a moment of doubt, right? Because like, I was like, who the heck am I to be putting any of these things that people are teaching me into a book and putting my name on the book? And like the seven sacred teachings is the Cree version, and the Anishinaabe one are the seven grandfather teachings, they call them. And like, okay, a lot of us talk about these things. I mean, those teachings are like kind of all over, you know, the mid plains and into Ontario. And like, but who am I to write them down in the book? And then I was speaking with an elder and I shared those doubts. And they just said, but knowledge is a group resource, Suzanne.
Yeah.
And this is why I love you having a podcast, because this is what we do. We share knowledge for each other because that's how we learn and grow. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what the definition of community is.
Well,
Is it
I
we help
invite you to my backyard in Calgary on a full moon. I
Yes.
do that. I have a fire, and it's just Indigenous only, so that we
Nice.
have a place to just, you know, throw tobacco and our worries into the fire and let that stuff go.
Nice.
For me, it's so important with that healing. And unfortunately, because we've had these water restrictions, there's
Mm.
been two full moons I've been unable to have a sacred fire, and we're going to have a very short window for the next one before they shut down the water again for everybody. So yeah, it's been interesting navigating that, because I think, you know, they have a colonial framework for the fire department. It's like, no, you can have one if you fill out these papers and get approved. And I'm like, I don't want to fight this. I'm not doing this. This is ridiculous.
You know, I was on the advisory circle, whatever they called it, at the Royal Ontario Museum when I lived in Toronto. I was on it for like 6 years or something. I was very happy to serve and to help with the work there. And we had the restriction at all the ROM meetings, and this is like publicly known, it's in the minutes and stuff. So I'm not sharing anything I can't share, but and when Jeanette, the staff member, would, you know, she's from out west here, she's Newtownlith, so she would speak in her language. We would do the, you know, we'd all say thank you in our own languages and kind of make it, you know, as reflect all of us. And we had, you know, whenever we would do an opening for our meetings, we had that restriction on like, you can't like do a smudge bowl, you can't like have any fire, any matches. And so Jeanette had this like candle app on her phone. So she would put the candle on her phone and put it in the middle of the table, and we would look at the flame on the phone. And listen, is it perfect? Nope. But did we want to like do a whole thing where we had to go to like the special room or like outside in the winter? And I mean, we made it work. So
Mhm.
however you make it work, you know,
Yeah.
for a long time in the aughts and the early tens anyway, until, you know, people's lives started changing and I started having changes in my own life. I used to do a solstice feast every year on the December one, not the June one, because usually June people are out, you know, doing the ones and the craft sales and whatever's going on in the city or the town or wherever you live. So I used to invite people over, and every year there would be some of the same people attending. Some people would attend for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then they would go off and have children and their lives were changed. And sometimes I had new people every year. And then through all of them, some of my friends that I've known for over 20 years would attend every one. And, you know, some years I didn't have enough money to buy. Like, I'm like, oh, geez, I usually buy 2 chickens. I think I can only afford one this year, you know, or maybe whatever. We make it work. And that gathering is what's important. And when it works, it works. And then I called it off after, I think it was like the 11th annual or something, because, you know, we weren't getting the same amount of people. And I thought, okay, we need to go on to new things. All of us, we need to do something new. So,
Sure.
you know, your full moon ceremonies, they'll come back in whatever shape they're supposed to come back.
Yeah, agreed. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty yeah, and I never did them until we came home from Lethbridge. We had a short 6 month time in Lethbridge.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got to start practicing my culture is what I have to do. So
Yeah.
that was the impetus to really get going, and knowing that I have, you know, the inherent right to do that. So it has been something that has mattered a lot to me, that's for sure. Just like smudging matters a lot to me. So, and then, you know, now I just purposely, I ask places, can I smudge? If the answer is no, then I don't have the event there. I don't do the
Yep.
thing there because
Yep.
they're not Indigenous friendly. There's no nicer way to say it, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I just want to say thank you for writing this book. Thank you for coming and joining us last minute. It is very much appreciated. I think it's a wonderful book for all of us, and I hope that more people read it and get what they need from it. And I'm a big believer too that if you reread a book, you get something different because you're more mature. Like, you know, I wasn't getting certain concepts when I was younger either. And I was very much raised with a colonial mindset, right? So I had a really hard time. It was more the resistance from the Ganawage. That time was really hard for me because I was in high school and I didn't understand my Indigenous identity, and I was so disconnected from my Indigenous family and a teenager, as you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was in the middle of Sea Cadets, so that's a very pro-colonial institution. Um, you know, at that time it was anyway. I don't know what cadets is like in 2024, but I do know that at that time it was very colonial, and I had a hard time understanding all of it and understanding who I was. And I only identified as a half native at that time because I couldn't even answer basic questions like, you know, my card says I'm Yellow Knives Dene. That's what I know. And that was all I knew. And I didn't understand Indian residential schools, or I knew domestic violence, and I knew in the media and in everything that I was reading and seeing, natives were not painted in a good way. So I felt very ashamed and embarrassed to be Indigenous at that time. And like, that's a trauma you can't get over. I seen a really great video from a Black content creator on TikTok, and she said, she was basically shaming white people because she was talking about being a kid in school and how much racism that she was facing, and like the pictures that people made of her with guns to their head and nooses and swastikas and, you know, chanting horrible things from Killing a Mockingbird. And she's like, that's great, you guys are all enlightened and such now, but you know, you've like literally changed me for life, and if you have to live with that guilt, live with it. I don't blame her for saying that. So it really, it kind of tied back to what you were saying, though, that we don't have to forgive for what has been and is still being done to us. You know, I'm just outside of Edmonton at the Enoch on Enoch land, and not just the other day, another cop killed another Black man who was unarmed. And you know, so it's not safe for BIPOC, for QT BIPOC in Alberta right now. And I mean, arguably it never has. So, you know, it's a hard time to be here, and I worry about my daughter and worry about what the future looks like on a regular. But again, talking back to your book, childhood trauma causes that deep-seated fear, causes that deep-seated issue. So it was just nice to really feel validated in a lot of the things that I was reading in your book. So I just can't thank you enough.
Good. Well, thank you. I mean, growing up, we share the same little bit of what you've shared there. We share the same sort of story. You know, I was racialized in Peace River, but yet my family didn't talk about being Indigenous like at all. And I'd be the one going home and going, Mom, we're Native, right? Because everybody says I'm Native,
I've
including like
seen
all
your
the neighbors.
childhood pictures. I'm like, I am shocked you get any lateral violence. Because like you on your website have pictures of you as a kid, and I know what it's like being that kid that is a little native, that gets picked on, that gets looked down upon, and not until they see me with my white dad do they kind of accept who I might be. You
Yeah.
know, that proximity to whiteness is a real like savior. I don't know if I would have been here today if I didn't have that. And we never talked about racism at all. And in fact, one of the things I've been triggered with was my dad talking about racism. He's still he will never be a Black Lives Matter supporter. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Yep. And
yeah.
that's a big part of this book and legacy too, is negotiating family. Because we like to talk about healing always in the individual sense of I'm going to this clinic or I'm going to get counseling and yay, you. But it's also about how families function, because I think that's how, and as an educator, like we study human development, and one of the biggest, what we say, you know, microcosms of a child is what surrounds them is family, right? So yeah, but then that macrocosm, all of the stuff that's outside there, whether it's the dominant society or even, you know, other like BPOC communities, we need to learn how to get along better. And there is a lot of solidarity, and we do have a lot of allies, you know. Um, I talk a lot about complex trauma, which is something that Judith Lewis Herman, the psychiatrist and researcher, has written a lot of books about. Her book, Trauma and Healing, Trauma and Recovery, whatever it's called, Judith Lewis Herman, came out in the 90s. And, you know, complex trauma is so much a part, I think, of colonization because it's about power and control, and the abuser or the control figure, which we could call colonial society, right? It's not just a person, it can be a thing. And having almost total and complete control over our identities, over our economics, economies and economic futures, over the land, over, you know it, everything, over our government systems, because now we get this band council, elected council thing, and all of it. And now even identities in terms of who's status, who's non-status. Oh, the fighting over that needs to stop, let me tell you. And I just think to myself that there's so much that we can do as individuals. And then I want people to take that back into their families and, like, you know, teach their grandma or some 16-year-old, you know, saying to their mom that, hey, in this book, it says, you know, da 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 da, and to start having these conversations in our families,
Yeah.
so that we can create that wellness and keep it going for our youngers. You know,
Oh,
that's my hope.
no, I feel that. I feel like
So
that needs to be a longer conversation about racism within families, because you know I've experienced it my entire life, so I just don't even like I'm sad I'm so hardened to it now, but it is what it is. And our friend posted in our chat, proximity to whiteness benefits package. I've borrowed this phrase from a Black organizer in Chicago named V. It's perfect.
yeah,
The benefits package of proximity to whiteness, like I get it. I never
yeah.
got it until the Black Lives Matter movement, and I
Mhm.
really started to unpack anti-Blackness more, because what you know, I grew up listening to NWA. I seen Rodney King's stuff, right? Like I listened to Oprah, so I wasn't racist, right? But, and I'll say that now that I've kind of had that Black Lives Matter movement, and we really start unpacking racism and, you know, how prominent anti-Blackness is in all of our media, just as anti-Indigenous is, just as anti-Asian is, just as, and like it's all there. And I don't know if I would have been open to really understanding it any sooner. And I think that's why, you know, when I experienced racism in my 30s, it hit me so hard, because I'm like, I thought I had the white benefits package here, you know,
Yeah,
but
I
because I
tried to
was,
be,
yeah,
I,
I I am a status native, so
Yeah.
I know it was automatically red flagged when I had my daughter. And so, you know, these were things like my daughter, who now under S3 should be eligible for status. Um, I had a hard time because it was presented to me when we were getting our status in what, 85, after 85, and the changes in the law. It was presented to me, you will get a free university degree, you should get your status. So I was like, okay, no problem. My white dad, okay, no problem. And then when I, you know, came to graduate high school, it didn't work like that. So I never did do post secondary educations. I did do like some night schools at SAIT and became a drafter. But that, like, there was no monies at that time. And at that time too, there was no like Indigenous circle or room or anything like
Fire.
that. Like
Yeah.
nothing like that. Nobody cared if you were Native, right?
Oh
So
yeah. Same with me in undergraduate school. We didn't have like an Indigenous Students Association. We didn't even have the word Indigenous. We didn't even have Aboriginal in the late 80s. It was just like Indians. People, CBC used to talk about Indians, and I used to
mhm,
get so mad, like, oh my God, you don't even know what you're talking about.
yeah.
Yeah, I tried being totally white because we are part white, but I tried being totally white in undergraduate school. And it was always other community members that would like blow my cover. So I laugh because it's funny now, but boy, it wasn't at the time. Because like I was working in the student newspaper and I'd be writing about Indigenous issues. So this was like 86 to 90, right? Because I'm that old. And you know, I wouldn't always disclose in the column like, well, I'm mixed, but I would talk about it in with my colleagues, which was nice to have, you know, other people who were writing. And of course, some of my colleagues who were of color, there's a huge Black community in the city that I went to undergraduate school in. And they were writing about the histories of their communities in that place. So it was nice that we had that. But like then I'd have other community members come up to the newspaper office because, you know, it wasn't common for Indigenous issues to be anywhere in the media, especially not in a student newspaper at a university in like 1988 or 89, whenever I was arts editor. And so they'd one time this fella called up and said, yeah, I want to talk to the person who wrote that column. Because they, of course, assumed I was white, like totally white, right? And I was trying to kind of be totally white as much as I could.
Sure.
And then because, you know, benefits package, right? Because I thought, well, maybe I'll be happier. Maybe I won't be so sad. Maybe I won't be so angry if I could just be totally white. Like, and that's
I know.
myself.
I
I'm
know
gonna
the
like,
logic, like a
that's the
dummy.
stupidest thing in the world. But that's what you think, right? So so I heard, you know, the call came in, and then my colleague said, you know, some guy, he says he's going to come up, and I was typesetting something in the early iteration Max, you know, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm here, da 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 da. And then he comes up, and I see somebody greet him, like, hey, can I help you? And the office is huge, it's in the student center, and it's like way over there. And I look up, and I thought, oh, that's a biff. Now that's something we used to say in the Peace Country, anyway, in Alberta in the 70s and 80s, big Indian face, right? Oh, it's a biff. Okay. So I finish what I'm typing, I save it up, da da da. I walk out and I go like, hi, thanks for coming up. So you wanted to talk about this thing that I wrote? And he looks at me and he goes, oh, oh, well, hi there. And of course, then the conversation, you can see his face doing the, oh, wait, she's not, oh, she's, oh, wait, okay. Hi. And then of course the conversation totally changed because
Yeah.
it was like, instead of him coming up to like educate me, because I was learning, you know, as a white person about this column, all of a sudden he was like, okay, I'm talking to a sister and we're both on our learning path. And then, you know, but I would like, oh, come on over here and let's talk over here. Cause I didn't want like my white colleagues to like listen because I was like, I'm trying really hard to be white. Can you like not blow my cover? Right? Because I would only talk to the Black colleagues about the truth. Oh my God, we've both been there. And you know what? I don't want that to be the case for our young people. I want
No, I
confidence.
want them to be proud of who they are. And, you know, I was having this conversation yesterday with with the author of that Indigenous horror stories. His name is Alex Soup. He had a wonderful, like we were talking about how much has changed since about 2015 when the TRC came out. How like, I want my daughter to be proud of
Yeah.
her Indigenous roots and not feel ashamed of it.
Yeah.
And I think for the first time, like they're growing up in a different world. Like, so for example, she's had the reservation dogs as like part of mainstream TV, and she has like Indigenous media and CBC Indigenous and Rosanna Deerchild regularly on the CBC. So like and the organizations locally are so good at giving the kids what they need, bus passes, counseling,
Nice.
and fun stuff to do. Like they have the most fun I've ever seen. And the schools are starting to get on board by hiring a few actual Indigenous people. And then suddenly we have really great Indigenous field trips, right? So like I've seen a massive shift in the youth coming up. And now, but to teach them, why about the addiction, why about the sadness, like that's the important part, right? So that's what this book, I hope, empowers them. I will tell you, my daughter really loved that Robin Kimmer, her book of Braiding the Sweetgrass. Loved that book, and she's like, when are you going to read this book, Mom? She keeps getting mad at me for
It's
not
a great
reading
book.
it. Yeah.
It's a great book. Yeah.
So I'm gonna have
and
to
it was
read that.
handwritten, But yeah, no, I want to echo you on that when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I was told that I was dirty. I mean, I did, because like, my mother was a single mother and she had 3 children, and she worked 2 jobs, and so yeah, I had like clothes from the Salvation Army, but they were clean. But there were a lot of assumptions, and I grew up with a lot of shame, being racialized, and then not understanding, because neither of my parents knew who they were. I mean, I got told stories about the Sadler side. Oh yes, those were the stories we were supposed to be proud of. I
Sure.
didn't hear anything about the other sides of the family, right? But so I have to go, and that's what I feel like I want to do as a writer, both in Legacy and Killing the Wittigo, and in stuff I'm working on now, is to write the stories. And I suppose, yes, my white people, as I call them, my white people and their stories will be in those books too. But I feel like it's part of my job to tell the Indigenous stories, because that's the change between 70s and 80s when I was coming up and today, is that we are telling those stories. And if I have those stories within me and I don't tell them, then I'm complicit in our erasure as Indigenous peoples. I'm complicit in the silencing that I felt growing up. So I feel like it's my duty. It's like literally my spiritual duty, that I have to get all this down and leave it behind for everyone, and especially the young folks. So but I appreciate the work you're doing on the podcast too. So
Oh, well, I know, like, I get some really great feedback from folks who are genuine, right? But I mean, it is long and boring. I annoy me, frankly. So it is great to have people who listen and give me kind feedback, I'll tell you. And then to discuss it, like sometimes it's just a private message, but most of the time it's actually in person with folks. Like they'll come up and be like, oh my God, I love this, blah, 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 or this person or whichever. So, and a lot of people don't join the book club, but they'll read the book based off of what my list is. So like I put out this list, geez, it would have been in December. And so for me, when I came across your book and they were promoting it, I'm like, oh, I'll put that on my list for next year. And so that's what I do. And I could probably put out a book like every month. So like it's not all on in December, but because really what my book club is whoever gives me Christmas presents. And I have all of these books, like I'm sure everyone here understands having your book stack of books that have been gifted to you over the year that you have to make time to read for. That's the book club selection for next year.
nice.
Yeah.
Get through your reading pile, and if I move my camera, you'll see some of my reading pile there, but that's only part of it.
I know, right? I've been meaning to buy some new book shelves for the back, because I'm just getting this ridiculous pile, and I'm like, I need more bookshelves. So that's next on my agenda. to do next
Oh,
week.
yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I feel you. And I thank you so much for writing this book. I thank you for your time tonight, for coming. I'm so excited that you did. And I hope that our readers feel inspired to read it and to give it to other Indigenous people as a gift. So thank you.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
I've got a website. My work email is public, and I'm on Insta and Facebook and where the heck else am I? Wherever, the socials. So, if people have questions, I often will like present the question on a post or something and then answer it. And so I'm here. Yeah. So I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, honored to. Thanks again for coming. And with that, I just say thank you. And if and when you have another book that comes out and you want to chat about it, of course, I will promote the hell out of it because, again, I know what it's like being a little native in a white Alberta town and receiving all the racism and no resources. And yet we're still here. So that's good.
We are. So let's say a big wow for Indigenous women standing up and not just surviving but thriving. And now we're helping to pass it down in whatever way we can. So
Yeah.
yay us.
Yay. Yay us is right. All right. Thanks,
All right.
folks, for coming. I'm just going to